All right, checking the microphone, test 1, 2. How are we sounding out there? Sweet, so it looks like we're all here. Everything is working, at least so far it is. Turn that guy on. Awesome. So I am very excited to be back for yet another Friday feedback stream. I couldn't make it last week, unfortunately, but this is one of my favorite things to do, and like one of the things I look forward to every week is hearing the music that you guys are working on, taking a listen to it, adding my thoughts and opinions to it, as well as and listening to any of the thoughts that other people in chat come up with. So for those of you who might be watching this video later on, if you're not familiar with the format, there's going to be a Google spreadsheet that I will be linking right now and tossing and pinning in the chat. So now that link is in the chat, and now I'm going to pin it up to the top. So if you have a song that you are working on that is either close to being done or is basically done, you just want like a little bit of feedback or some thoughts on what you could do to improve that track, put it in the spreadsheet, as well as put a link to it. It can be a private stream, it can be whatever. Put your name, YouTube name in there, and any notes or comments you might have. If there's like, if you're trying to focus on the mix, put it in there so that way I can pay attention to the mix, or you want, thoughts or ideas on drum production or whatever. Just put whatever notes you want in there that might give me some context for what you are trying to do with that track. And then I will just kind of basically go chronologically from top to bottom through the spreadsheets. If you are a member of the Discord channel, which will be linked below, you can always submit your tracks early. So if you can't make it or whatever, you can always pop your track in there and I will get to it whenever I can. And then you can always watch these videos later on because all of these videos get uploaded to the channel later at some point. Van, what's up? Well, welcome. How are you doing today? I saw you sent me a track and I think it's in the spreadsheet. It is, you're the first one up, so perfect. And then you also asked some questions in the Discord channel, only one of which that I actually remember. So I figured we can just talk about those since you're here. And then we will get to your track in just a moment. Let me pull up the question you had. Okay, so the first question you had in the Discord, I was going to answer Discord, but it's way easier to talk than it is to type onto Discord. And I figured you'd probably be here anyway. So the first question was basically AU versus VST. Is there a general preference on a Mac? And then you're just kind of embellishing on that question a little bit. So yeah, so in terms of AU versus VST, in my experience, they're pretty much like the same thing in terms of CPU usage, in terms of audio quality, in terms of functionality, in terms of like what they can do. I know there's some minor differences in functionality, but for them, it's never enough that it's like really made a big difference on my own personal workflow or anything like that. So your mileage may vary a little bit depending on which plugins you have and maybe like how recently they've been updated. But in terms of like the two of them, and I talked to a bunch of people about this and everybody kind of agrees it's kind of like it's either or, it's fine. The one situation that I have noticed is that Live doesn't like it as much when you're using both. So maybe you have like a couple AU and a couple VST going on in the same session at the same time. Sometimes that will not necessarily cause issues, but it tends to not be quite as efficient in terms of like CPU usage and just working well. So generally the rule of thumb that I tell people is if you have certain plugins that are only one or only the other, like you have some plugins that are only VST that you really like, then use those, and that way you don't need to mix and match between AU and VST. You can either use all VSTs or all AUs, but you definitely can get away with having a session with both, and it's not the end of the world. But yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts on it. I've never really noticed any huge differences in terms of like what you can do with them, or them behaving properly, anything like that. And then the second question is issues with Java VM. Java virtual machine errors. I honestly don't have an answer for you about that one. It seems like you're when live is crashing, you're looking at error logs and you're having some, and you're noticing some issues with Java virtual machine errors. I have not encountered that personally, and so unfortunately, I just don't have any good info about that. So it's probably not a very well-known issue. Otherwise, I probably would have encountered it at some point. But yeah, you might need to ask somebody else about that who's encountered that before. But yeah, unfortunately, that's something that I have not really encountered. Cool. So those are your two questions, I think. Yeah, let me double check, make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah. Yeah, my computer, well, I got this computer a couple months ago because my old one was not working at all. And this one, there's still occasionally some weirdness that's going on with it. But I have not had that very many crashes. It seems like most of my crashes end up happening from Big Sur just being weird. I'm not a big fan of Big Sur. Yeah, the Java virtual machine things seems pretty niche. So I'd be curious to see what is running the Java virtual machine and like what's causing that to be involved, because that's an interesting one. Sweet. Well, with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and start pulling up some tracks here. So Van, I believe your track is going to be first. And just linking like this is totally fine. It's cool that I saw you put it on downloadable, but it's generally way easier to just stream it off of SoundCloud or anywhere that you can stream stuff. What's up, Jason? How are you doing this evening? I've not talked about the gig. Gig went very, very well. I had a fantastic time. I played 2 sets, one on Saturday night and one on Sunday morning. And I had a great time. People seem to have a good time. I've already gotten like other gig offers starting to come in based off of that one gig. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm excited just to like be back in front of people and like interacting with people in person again. It's like the most people I've talked to since basically COVID. But yeah, really well done. It was kind of like a private invite only kind of festival thing, pretty underground, but it's really well done. It's the first time they'd run an event and they crushed it. Sweet. So let's go ahead and check out this track. I'm also going to check volumes as well. So you guys will have to let me know if it's too quiet or too loud. And turn down a tiny bit. Yeah, really heavy on the Clash vibes, which sounds like that's what you're going for.
wanna be there when you smile at the end. I wanna be there when you need a best friend. I wanna be there when you come up for air. I wanna be there for you forever. Someday, cause someday at a time, I wanna be here for you. One day closer to a night sublime, I wanna be there with you. I'll wait for you forever. 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 No matter what they say, wait for you. It's a never-ending state. I'll cherish every day. It's a never-ending. No matter what they say, an impossible wait.
Interesting. You got a lot of stuff going on here, and I think your kind of reference to the Clash here applies in a lot of different ways. Just like rhythmic calling, or rhythmically, it has a very kind of like London calling kind of rhythm to it. The drums have this very kind of like clashy kind of feel. The vocals have a very clashy feel. Like it almost feels like you're, well, it definitely feels like you're like bringing a lot of influence from that. I felt like the tempo and the arrangement were good for the most part. However, I think there's most of my feedback is going to be mix related, because I think you're doing some cool things with the mix, and I think some things end up just being a little bit too much. And I think by fixing, you can fix the mix and fix the arrangement at the same time. It's like one thing that you can do that'll clear both of those things up, because I think overall the arrangement is mostly pretty fine. I think my biggest issue that's not mix related has to do a little bit with just clutter. There's a lot of like your normal kind of like rock band layers. You got your drums, you get your guitar, you get the vocals, you have that kind of, all that kind of stuff, and then you have a few kind of like classical music kind of layers. You have like some strings going on there, and then you have a few kind of like electronic layers going on in there. And so there's a few points where you kind of overwhelm the listener with different things they need to be listening to, which number one makes it really hard to mix, but also just makes it sound too busy. The exception to that is the very end here, when you have multiple different vocal layers going at the same time, plus all of the sounds. That's kind of a nice way to kind of crescendo the song. So I think from like here onwards, I think it's totally okay to kind of go crazy with your layering and your amount of stuff you're doing. But I think in this area and this area in particular, I think you can remove a couple of the layers, the things that are going on in the background, just like totally get rid of them. And that way it doesn't sound cluttered. And that way, as part of the arrangement, as part of like shifting energy from one part of the song to the next, the addition of new layers brings more energy, it brings more excitement. And that way, when you get to the end, you're purposely overwhelming your listener. So for example, I think it was in this section right here. It sounds like there's like an arpeggiated synth in the background. I don't think that necessarily even needs to be there. Like I have to focus really hard just to listen to hear that, and it's taking up a lot of space in your mix. Like it's nice because it's adding like a little bit of a melodic element, which I think is something the song could maybe use a little bit more of. But it's just like it's sitting way in the background, taking up space, making it harder to hear the vocals, making it hard to hear the guitar, making it hard to hear the drums. And then similarly over here, this part's fine. Yeah, you have the like arpeggiated part in the background, and then you have the strings also come in. So your listener is trying to hear multiple vocal layers, the arpeggiated part, the strings, the guitar, the drums, all kind of at the same time, and there's not like one clear thing that's standing out amongst those. So removing layers when you don't need them, and then kind of like purposely building your way up towards a crescendo in the last section of the song, I think will make your mixing way easier, because there'll be a lot fewer things you need to like worry about when you're mixing. As far as mix goes, I felt like your drums were a tiny bit too loud throughout the entire track, with the exception, again, maybe the very end. They just really kind of stood out. And it's not often in a song of this style, of this genre, that you want the drums to really kind of stand out and be like the most loudest, most important thing. So I think those drums can go down a tiny bit, kind of across the board. And I think your vocal mixing, you're doing some really cool things with it, but I think you could play around with it a little bit. The first major thing that I noticed is you have your main vocal part, which sounds like it's panned a little bit to the left. And then occasionally you have another vocal part, like a backing vocal part, that's panned a little bit to the right, which is not inherently itself a bad thing. I might move them both a little close to the center, but your right side backup vocal is louder than your main vocal part. So when it comes in, it kind of like feels a little kind of like jarring, a little out of place. So a little bit more a little more consistency between your different vocal layers, I think, will be super helpful. And then just in general, across the board, a decent amount more compression on those vocals, like really make them stand out, really make them like cut through the mix, and compression's a great way to do that. You could also get away with like a bit more reverb on the vocals if there's not any on already. But I think that you're doing some really cool stuff, again, especially here towards the end, where you have like multiple different vocal layers all kind of coming in, kind of like rotating. Yeah. So compress the main vocal layer a bit more, and then compression on the whole vocal group, I think, will also be really, really helpful. And that way there's like not some that are like way up here and some down here. They're more kind of consistent in terms of their volume. Yeah, those I think were the main issues, is too many background layers in places that they don't need to be. Drums are a tiny bit too loud. Vocals could be louder across the board and a little bit more consistent. And I think the more kind of backup vocals there are, the farther they can be panned. So the more important the vocal is, and the more kind of like central it is to the focus of the song, the more it should go in the middle, and the more kind of like backgroundy kind of stuff can be panned off a little bit more to the left or right. But yeah, those are the main things I'm noticing here. I would love a guitar solo in here. I don't know if I think you need something like that, but having another guitar part that's doing something a little bit more melodic, I think, could be really cool, and a cool way to help kind of like tie the whole track together, especially if you want to go for that kind of like clash kind of sound. Sweet, yeah. Chat, you got any other thoughts, feedback, questions, comments? Van, is all that stuff making sense? What's up, Sulfan? No worries about being gone. I've also been kind of coming in and out for these song feedback sessions, so you haven't missed that much. But yeah, send me some tracks. If you got something, I'm ready for you. Yeah, vocals are very important. Any song that's gonna have vocals, most likely they're the most important thing in the song, because that's what tells the story. It's what keeps people interested. It's like that's how you keep people focused. So got to make sure the vocals are not only clear, but also like clean the whole way through. But I appreciate you saying that track. Also, for anybody else who is maybe sitting in chat or just joining us, if you would like to share a track, the spreadsheet is linked up at the top of the chat, so like a pinned post out there. Just toss in a link to wherever I can stream it, and I will get to it as I kind of work my way down the list. And then we got a Dig the Cat track, who I believe mentioned that he will not be able to make it for stream, but he'll be watching the video later on. Cool. So we will, let's jump into this one and see what's going on. up, Kevin? And Sulfane, we'll get to that question once we get through this track, because I think it's a really interesting question. Interesting. I'm digging this track. I like what you got going on so far. However, I think there's kind of two big issues with it. Number one, you're kind of in between sections is what I'll call them, feel a little bit too sparse. Meaning basically your intro here, and then this section over here, and then this section over here. They're all okay, but I think they need to be more than okay. I think they need to be able to basically reset the energy of this song, kind of like, go from like super dancey down to like, ambient or chill or whatever, but also stay interesting. And I feel like when this section over here started, I was like, okay, cool, I'm into this. This is like an interesting melodic part. It's bouncing around, it's got some delays in there. It sounds really cool, like it. But I think that you need a little more to carry it. So this could be toss in some vocal samples, toss in some background pad sounds, do some crazy stuff with delays, have like automate the delays so the delays change over time, so it's not always the exact same delay. Add in a little bit more layers. Like I know you kind of like bring in percussion, or you bring in the bass over here and you bring the percussion over here. But I want something a little bit more going on there. Something that has like a lot of character, something that will help me like remember the song after I listen to the track. Like if this gets played in a DJ set of a bunch of other songs that sound kind of similar, what's going to make this one stand out and what's going to make me remember it? So those areas, all of them, especially the intro too, like I know it's kind of like standard procedure to like make a really DJ-able intro for a song like this, but put something else in here. Like maybe even take like this guy and toss it in, layer it with your beat. Because this by itself is like, if this comes on the Spotify playlist or something, if I have a really short attention span, I'm gonna listen to this and be like, all right, next. So make sure the intro has something like interesting in there, with a lot of stuff going on to really like capture somebody's attention. And that's true for this section too, and then this section too. Other than that, I do feel like you're kind of like dancier, groovier sections. These work really well. I like how they kind of change and evolve over time. It's not the exact same thing, but it's like mostly the same thing. I do feel like a little bit more variety at the bass line would be kind of cool. Like maybe keep the notes, but swap the patch a little bit. So it's kind of like rhythmically you're kind of doing the same thing, note-wise you're doing the same kind of thing. But sound-wise, maybe it's a little different each time. And then just something a little bit more melodic going on. Like you're doing a bit with some of those melodic elements kind of bouncing up there, but the bass is really carrying a lot of like the note changes that are going on there. So a little bit more melody in there, I think will definitely help out. And again, vocal samples. I think this song is basically screaming to me it needs some vocal samples. These can be whole vocal phrases of people like, singing whole verses or whatever, or they could be little tiny chops. You just take a single word, chop it up, sprinkle it in there, pitch it up and down kind of as time goes on. And I think that'll add a lot of what I think this track needs. But other than that, I think like the drum beats grooving, the drums I think sound really solid. I think percussion might be a tiny bit loud, but that's something that's like not a big deal. You can fix that in the mix. The kick could maybe stand out with the mix a little bit more, like a little more kick. I don't think would hurt. But yeah, those are the main things I'm noticing here. It's got all the core elements of there. It just needs a little more personality, especially during the break sections, and a little bit more kind of like melodic stuff during the more dancey parts. But it's pretty on point for the style music. Chat, anybody else got any thoughts or ideas? Yeah, I agree with Van. Like a hook in there, something to bring you home. I think it definitely wouldn't hurt there. All right, and then we had a question in chat about should you worry about phasing, or was it phasing or phase cancellation, or both, or just if things are out of phase when you're making ambient music, which is a fantastic question. To me, and this might be a little bit of a hot take, to me, there are really only two situations. There's primarily two situations, and maybe a handful of offshoots. But there's two situations where you need to worry about phasing. Situation number one is if you are recording a lot of audio. Generally, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about multiple microphones set up in the same room. So for example, if you are recording rock music in the studio, you got a drum set, you're gonna have microphones all over the drum set. You're gonna have one on the kick drum, you're gonna have one about the snare drum, you're gonna have one over the cymbals, all that kind of stuff. You might have overheads, you might have stuff far out the room. You might have, 8, 12, 15, 20 mics hooked up around a drum set. And the issue that you're gonna find with phasing a lot of time is when you have multiple waveforms that are very, very, very similar to each other, or exactly the same each other, but the timing is off a little bit. And that causes weird things to happen with the waveforms and makes it sound bad, or in some situations you might get phase inversion or phase cancellation, not inversion, but cancellation. Or things will just sound weird and kind of off because you're basically playing the same recording, but one microphone is right next to the drum set and one is a little bit farther away, and you're hearing the same sound at the same time, recorded milliseconds apart from each other, basically. It can happen sometimes with vocals a little bit, but mostly we're talking like multiple mics set up in the same room for recording sessions. That's when you need to worry about phasing primarily, because again, that's when you're going to have similar waveforms with similar timing, but maybe not exactly the same timing. When you're making ambient music, that's probably not a big deal. The second situation where phasing really kind of comes to play and you really need to worry about it primarily is going to be with kick drums and sub bass. Because once again, you're going to have very similar waveforms at very similar frequencies, if not the exact same frequency. And lost my train of thought. So yeah, similar frequency, but not the exact same frequency. Or maybe the timing is off a little bit. Like maybe you have like your kick drum happening that's playing, your boomy 808 kick drum is playing an F note, and then your sub bass is happening at the same time, also playing an F note. They're both big, huge sine waves, so very similar waveform, happening at almost, but maybe not exactly at the same time. That might also cause some weird phasing issues, potentially. If you're making ambient music that doesn't really involve either of those things, I would not stress about it. And I think Van might have even mentioned this in chat. Trust your ear. If it sounds fine, it's fine. And like there maybe could be situations where you have like similar things happening, like similar waveforms, but maybe like slightly different timings, maybe with like slightly different reverbs or something might cause something to be off a little bit. But honestly, like it's not something I would really concern myself about. I think a lot of times people worry about it in the EDM world, specifically in regards to like kick drums and things like that, because you need to make sure the kick sounds super hard. And if you're getting weird phase stuff, it might screw with kind of the volume of the impact of your kick or of your sub bass. But other than those two situations, there's only like a handful of situations where I think that are like really kind of niche that phasing is really going to cause you any issues, or you really kind of need to watch out for it. Sweet. So, and then Van has a follow-up question. Any phase relate or does Live have any phase alignment tools built into it? Not really. You could do some weird stuff with warping. Like if you had an audio file, you could like shift the warping of something, so that the timing is a little bit off. If you do want to like just play around with the phase in the utility audio effect, you will have options to invert the phase of your left side, invert the phase of your right side, or both of them. You can also do things like only get the left side, or only get the right side, or swap your left and right side. So you can like do a couple things with phasing here. But as far as like aligning phase, not off the top of my head. But yeah, phasing is one of those things that I see a lot of people talk about online, but like in reality, it's much rarer of a thing to actually have it really kind of screw up your song or be a big deal. It's like something to be aware of, but it's not something that you generally need to stress out about in terms of when you're producing things. Sweet. Well, I appreciate the question. That phasing stuff is really, really fascinating. It's like some really interesting, weird science of sound stuff that is important, but is usually not that big of a deal. All right. Also, just as a reminder, in case there's anybody out there in chat who has not yet shared a song, who wants to share a song, the spreadsheet is going to be linked up at the top of chat, and you can just toss it in there, and I will take a listen to it. So it looks like next up we got a track from Kevin. Kevin, how are you doing today? All right. So yeah, anything you want us to be listening out for, Kevin? Yeah, occasionally if you have like some interesting widening stuff, you can potentially cause some phase issues. Interesting. So yeah, that's really cool. It feels like in a lot of ways a departure from a lot of the tracks I've heard you write before, and in some ways is like still classic like Eyes for Empties. So like sound design wise and melodically, it's like very much you, but rhythmically, it's like it feels pretty different than a lot of the other stuff I've heard you write, which is cool. I like um, hearing you kind of branch out and doing things a little bit different, and I think it's working for you in a lot of different ways. I think overall, this track has this really nice kind of mellow, pretty vibe. It's like, and again, like going back to some of your like roots in like 8-bit kind of music and melodies, it like very much lands in that zone, but um, less of the kind of 4-on-the-floor thing, which I like quite a bit. So as far as things you can work on, I didn't hear like a huge amount of like mix stuff that needed in there. Was there? Did I skip something at the end? I don't know. I guess not. But speaking of glitches, I do feel like I kind of want this to be a little more glitchy. I kind of want there to be a little bit kind of like little glitchy fills, or even some more kind of like glitchy percussive stuff, a little bit more kind of like sound, like interesting weird sound effects, a little kind of like ear tingling background noises, I think could go really well in this track. And that might just be from my perspective. I listen to a lot of music that sounds kind of like this, but a little more glitchy. In fact, I would recommend, if you haven't checked it out, listen to the new album by Gladkill, Gladkill. Very much in this kind of vein, does this kind of like pretty kind of music with this kind of tempo. But that might give you some interesting ideas of directions you want to check out if you like want to go down that route. In terms of other things, I do like the wobbly bass line, but I do think that could change up a little bit. As far as I can tell, it just kind of like does the same thing throughout the whole track. Like sometimes the wobble is more present and sometimes it's less present. Sometimes you just have kind of like the big sub bass in there. But I think a little more variety in that. Maybe switch up the LFO speed, maybe switch up the sound design a little bit, maybe get a little bit more crazy with some effects that you have on that. Could be kind of cool. I don't think it's super necessary, but could work. I did feel like this section right here has a lot of potential to explore some more. This is really pretty and works really well. So doing more things like that, I think could work really well, and potentially maybe even a longer section like that, where you like really explore that melody without anything else in there, and then you bring the drums back in to kind of like fill that out. As far as mixing goes, kick could maybe be a tiny bit louder and snare could be a tiny bit quieter. I do really like your snare though. The snare thing sounds really solid. I think in sections like this, where you kind of like bring in a lot of things at the same time, definitely EQing out some of the mid-range so you can hear on a lot of those sounds, I think will make it a little bit cleaner. It sounds fine right now, but it does sound a little cluttered with just a lot of frequencies going on. And it's only in those bigger sections. In sections that are more minimal, here it's not a big deal. That little kind of flute sounding melody could be a little bit louder. I also think it'd be interesting to play with octaves a little bit on some of your melodic parts, have them switch up and down a little bit more. Yeah, overall, I think it's sounding pretty good. I don't think you have that much work to do here on mixing this. It's just cleaning things up a little bit here and there. Yeah, overall, I think it sounds really solid. More break sections, though. More exploring that kind of negative space like you do in this little break here. I think it'd be great. So yeah, so a lot of these sounds can definitely be recreated with the stock devices. Like to me, like the wobbly bass sound is pretty straightforward. Oh, it does change speeds a little bit. That's just like a saw wave with a low pass filter on it that has a little bit of LFO on the filter frequency, which we can take a look at building some of those kinds of sounds in just a moment if you're interested, Jason. But yeah, anybody else got any other thoughts, questions, comments, feedback, ideas about Kevin's track? I like it. This is probably one of my more favorite tracks that you've done, Kevin. So I'm into it. Also, it looks like we do have a few more people that are kind of just joining us. If you would like to submit a track for me to listen to, there is the spreadsheet that is linked above at the top of the chat, and you just toss the link in there, as well as your YouTube name, and I will take a listen to it. Yeah, I appreciate you sending me new stuff. That's what I want to hear. Nothing but the freshest tracks here on the Friday feedback stream. Sweet. Well, it looks like as of right now, we are all caught up on the spreadsheet, which is great. Big thanks to all you guys who've already shared tracks. All tracks are welcome here. So if you are new to making music or you're not feeling confident or whatever, toss it in there. It's not a big deal. We're going to have some fun. We're going to all get better together. Kevin, unfortunately, I am not that familiar with the Batman and Robin soundtrack. But I'll have to take a. I'll after stream. I'll take a listen to it. Cool. So I'm gonna leave the spreadsheet open, and that way, if people join later on, they're always welcome to put a link in there. But Jason, I think, was asking a little bit about sound design and doing this kind of sound design. So we'll probably take a look at how to do like the bass line and maybe like a melodic part or something like that, or maybe other things if we have time. But again, big thanks to everybody who's sharing tracks. That it makes the Friday feedback stream the Friday feedback stream. Otherwise, it would just be me sitting here staring at my computer for a couple hours. All right. In order to make this work, I am going to need to switch some audio things around. So bear with me just a moment while I make sure everything works. In fact, I'm going to make my life easy. Or hopefully easy. There you go. There's my audio secrets revealed. I just need to remember to switch that back if we go back to listen to tracks. All right. Cool. So, Kevin, I don't know if you have, or not Kevin, Jason, I don't know if you had any specific sounds that you were thinking about when you were listening to that track for us to recreate, but I'm going to start with the bass because it's pretty easy to make. And then we'll make some melody sounds, but we can talk a little about just sound design in general. In most cases, I'm talking about like 80 to 90% of the sounds that you hear that were made with some really big fancy plugin, they can be made with stock devices in Live. There are a handful of things that Live cannot do. It just doesn't have the functions to do it. However, most different kinds of sound design, especially if we're talking about the basics of sound design, wavetable, operator, analog, simpler, sampler, they can make almost anything you want. These days, I barely use any third-party plugins, and when I do, they're mostly effects. I don't use a lot of third-party synthesizers. So in this situation, I personally think that if you were kind of like newer to sound design and you are just kind of like learning your way around a synthesizer and how to start making your own stuff from scratch and getting away from presets, Wavetable is going to be not only the most user-friendly, is also just the most versatile of the live synthesizers. I personally like Operator a little bit better, but Operator is a little weird until you kind of like spend a lot of time with it. If you're looking just to like sit down, make some sounds, learn some synthesis, Wavetable is going to be 100% the way to go. So let me just double check the audio here, make sure this sounds okay. You guys can hear that, hopefully. So I'm just going to do like a general overview of synthesis as I do this. And that way you can just kind of see how this process works. So there are going to be 3 main parts to a synthesizer, generally, or 4 parts, depending on how you look at it. There's going to be the oscillator, which is what generates the sound. So we have 2 oscillators over here, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. Wavetable is a wavetable synthesizer, so we have a bunch, like we can shift between different oscillator shapes. And the cool thing about wavetable synthesis is we can change the shape as it's playing. So as I play a note, it'll change sound as I click and drag and move this around. For the purposes of what we're doing right now, we're just going to stick with one shape, but just know that part of what makes wavetable synthesis cool is we can change that on the fly as sound is running through it. The next part of a synthesizer is going to be a very fast, very abbreviated version of Synthesis 101. Is going to be a filter. So you probably have dealt with filters before. We have all our basic filter shapes. We got a low pass, we got a high pass, band pass, notch, and a morphing filter. Filters are basically going to allow us to subtract frequencies out of what we're hearing. And once again, if you are learning synthesis, using an audio effect like the spectrum analyzer is really, really useful because it allows you to see what frequencies you're hearing. So when I play a saw wave, these are all the frequencies we're hearing. And if I take that saw wave and run it through a low pass filter, we can see those frequencies move around. So same thing if I'm running like a band pass filter. So I'm a very visual learner, so being able to like move this control here and see how it's affecting the frequencies is very, very useful just to like learn how something like this works. So we're basically going to be doing some like basic subtractive synthesis where we're going to be generating a waveform using our oscillator, and then we're going to be subtracting out frequencies from that waveform using this guy right here, using the filter. And we of course have filter frequency and resonance, which are the 2 basic controls you're going to see on every filter ever. And then we have our modulators. This is really, really important. Modulators allow us to control a parameter over time. And inside of something like Wavetable, we have 5 modulators. We have 3 envelopes. Envelope number 1 is our volume envelope. Envelope 2, envelope 3 are just extra auxiliary envelopes. We can use them to control whatever we want. Then we have 2 LFOs, LFO 1 and LFO 2. Basically, the difference between an envelope and an LFO is an envelope allows you to change a parameter over time, one time, meaning it goes attack, decay, sustain, release, whereas an LFO will continuously move up and down. So, for example, if I want this filter frequency to move up and down as I play a note, I can hold down a note and I can, with my mouse, move this up and down like that. But that's really boring and I don't want to have to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to attach this LFO to the filter frequency. So that way, when I play a note, instead of me having to sit there with my mouse and move it up and down or automate it, the LFO will move the filter frequency up and down for me. So to do this, I'm going to go over to the matrix page. So the matrix is where you connect your 5 modulators, our 3 envelopes and our 2 LFOs, to any parameter we want. Literally any parameter inside of Wavetable. So for example, if I want my Wavetable position to move up and down, we can see over here we have oscillator 1 position. So on this row right here, we're going to go to LFO 1 and turn it up. And now as I hold down a note, going to move up and down at the amount that I set right here. So 100, it's going to move all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. At 9, it's going to barely move up and down. So this controls the amount it moves. If I go into negative values, it'll move down first and then up. That usually doesn't make a huge difference, but just in case that matters. But we don't want to move the wavetail position up and down, although sometimes we do. We want to move our filter frequency up and down. So you can see when I click on filter frequency, it gets added to this list right here. And feel free to pop in any questions in chat if you guys have any as I kind of go through this. But if I click on filter resonance pops up here. So the most recent parameter you've clicked on will be added to this list. So filter frequency, I'm going to turn this up a little bit. And so now as I play a note, it moves that filter up and down. So it's basically turning down my higher frequencies, but it's like moving it up and down. So that's the basic idea. That's the basic concept to make the kind of bass sound that Kevin was using. And we'll go back to using Kevin's track as a reference track. And then I can also adjust the starting position here by adjusting the filter frequency. So if I start this way down here, it's starting lower, so it's only going so far. If I start way up here, it'll sound very different. So starting position can be changed, and then the amount that it moves can be changed. If I want the speed to be different, I can go back to my mod sources, go to LFO1, and I can change the rate right here. So I can make this faster or slower. Like that. Or if I don't want this to be in hertz, if I want this to be synced to the grid, I can hit the little note button right here. Now, instead of having the timing in hertz, I have the timing in eighth notes. And that's how you make that kind of like classic old school dubstep-y wobbly sound. So I might give this like a tiny bit more resonance. And then I can go back in here and change the amount. And you can find there like the sweet spot where you get that to do the thing you want to do. So that's how I'd kind of start with making a bass line like the one Ken was using. Either saw wave or square wave, something kind of basic like that. And then of course we can change the speed here. Something like that. Yeah, we can definitely take a look at going off grid to add more swing to the groove. Are you familiar with the groove pool and how the groove pool works or not? Because that's also something we can kind of talk about along the same lines. So yeah, so let's go back and I'm gonna have to keep switching my audio here. Can I do both at the same time? I think so. Hopefully this works. Hopefully I don't get like any weird feedback loops or anything. All right, so Kevin, where'd your song go? So if we go back and take a listen to the bass line that Kevin was doing. So you can hear it's basically playing like a really low frequency, and you can hear that filter kind of moving up and down. Yeah, no worries, Jason. So you can hear that filter kind of moving up and down. But it's pretty subtle, right? So we can go in here and we can try to recreate something kind of similar. Something like that, maybe not even quite so far. And a little bit less here. I like that a little better for this. Yeah, that's gonna be kind of like the basic starting point. So yeah, so hopefully that kind of answers your question about at least how to kind of make some of these sounds yourself. In this case, I'm just listening to what he's doing. I'm noticing, okay, it's a very low frequency, definitely has a low pass on it, a little bit of motion to make it move up and down to create that wobble sound. And then from here, I can kind of embellish it a little bit and kind of tweak it a little bit. So I could like toss on some unison, a little less unison, make it monophonic. Change the speed of it. Maybe even less unison. So that kind of thing. You don't need any fancy plugins to do stuff like this. It's like pretty straightforward. All right, let's do one more sound from here, and then we'll take a look at swing and kind of moving things off the grid. So there's also going to be a lot of those kind of like main 8-bit melody parts are going to also be fairly simple and fairly straightforward. Let me listen to them one more time. As well as like an arpeggiated one. So in this situation, let's go ahead and delete this guy. We want something a little bit more in kind of like the mid-rangey kind of thing. A lot of times, especially if you're going for those more kind of like 8-bitty kind of sounds, the more kind of like old school video game kind of sounds, you can be really basic on the synthesis because the synthesizers they were using to make those sounds were really limited in what they could do. So you really don't need to be fancy about how you're doing your sound design. So something like this, in order to create a nice kind of like plucky melody sound, what we're going to do here is go into our volume envelope. So we have these 2 extra envelopes here, but we have our amp envelope. And we're going to take the sustain and turn it all the way down. What this means is now when I hold down a MIDI note, it still only plays for a very short period of time. And again, that's going to be kind of like my basic starting point. And this again can be either a saw wave or a square wave or a triangle wave. We give it a little bit of attack, it'll have more of like a whoosh. Whereas it's like this, it has more of like a plucked kind of thing. So a great way to get that kind of like, again, old school kind of 8-bitty kind of sound. Let's put some more unison on it. Those kind of things can work great. Another great thing to do here, which I noticed Kevin was doing for at least some of them, but not all of them, is put a little arpeggiator on it. And let's make this a little longer. So just play a chord, run it through the arpeggiator, run it through here. And that's how you can get like one of these sounds over here. Some of the background melodic sounds there. If you want to, if it's a little bit too ringy, you can do the same thing with the filter frequency. So envelope 2 will be our filter frequency. We'll take the sustain, turn it down, give it a little bit of attack, and we'll apply that to our filter frequency. So that way each time there's a new note, and we can play with the timing here. And that way it's not quite so like piercing. Let's give it a little bit more. Like you can get like tons of all those like video gamey 8-bitty sounds just by doing stuff like this. Also, if you like crank, this is not what Kevin did, but you can crank up the speed on arpeggiator. A lot of cool stuff you can do there. But yeah, you don't need to do anything fancy. If you understand how oscillators work, if you understand how filters work, and if you understand how your modulators work, namely your envelopes and your LFOs, there is a world of sound design you can do that does not need any fancy plugins, and this is without even getting into any effects. So Jason, hopefully that hopefully gives you a little bit of stuff to be thinking about when it comes to doing your own sound design. And like where you can get started with it. Again, you don't need to know what every single button or knob does, but if you understand how this works, you start to understand how this area works, and you understand specifically your modulators and how to apply your modulators and where to apply them, infinite sound design can be done there. So yeah, let me know if that did make sense, and then we can dive more into it in a little bit. And then there was a question in the chat about they were watching people working with off-grid, basically turning off the grid to create more swing in their tracks, which is a fantastic question. In fact, I think I even made a video about Groove Pool a while back on the channel if you want to review it and check it out. But I'm going to go over some of the basics, just kind of like what swing is and what groove is and why the grid is actually your enemy. So let's grab a drum rack. Let's toss this in here. So say I am very lazy about how I write my drum beat and got a good snare. Yep. And all right, here is my drum beat that I invented. I'm gonna turn these hi-hats down. Cool, here's my drum beat. This is how a lot of people will write their drum beats and write a lot of their MIDI. So they'll just plug it in and then boom, there it is. However, the issue here is that when you're playing a beat like this, it's totally quantized, 100% quantized. Every single one of these hi-hats and kicks and snares is 100% exactly on the grid. It's essentially as if a robot drummer was playing this. However, if you were playing a band, any kind of band of any genre, no matter how good your drummer is, they will not play perfectly on time. They're going to speed up a little bit, they're going to slow down a little bit, they're going to change over time. And so, in my opinion, a good drummer can play things on time. A great drummer knows how to purposely not play things on time. And this is especially noticeable if you listen to a lot of different styles of music, like funk music. A funk drummer will be all over the place with the timing of their performance, but it'll sound so much better than anything quantized. And this is actually a big issue I found a lot in especially EDM, any kind of style like dance music. Everything's just super quantized all the time. And it makes it sound robotic and it makes it sound boring and it just strips the life out of a performance of not just drums, of anything. So what both myself and it sounds like people you've been watching produce have found is that if you purposely move things off time, it sounds way better. It sounds more human. It's more interesting to listen to. It's more fun to dance to. It just feels more alive. It feels more organic. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. So some examples of different ways to do this would be to just manually do it. Just manually, purposely move things off of the grid. So for example, I happen to really like it when my snares are a tiny bit late. So I could just take my snare and I could just move it a tiny bit off of the grid, like that. Doesn't need to be a huge amount. If it's too far off, if it's over here, it's going to sound bad. So you have to find like the sweet spot in the middle where you just move it off a tiny bit. And what happens is when you have like that kick and then a snare, by adding that like tiny bit of extra time there, really makes that snare feel impactful because you're expecting it to happen right there, but it happens a fraction of a second later. Kevin, thanks for popping by. Hopefully I will see you around real soon. So by purposely adding in that space, by purposely moving things that are on the grid off time, again, it makes it feel more human, just like gives it that little extra bit of stank on your beat that you really want. So you can do this, like I said, manually, just little by little, just dragging things off. Also, just for your key command sakes, Command 4 just turns your grid off. So that way, as I move things around, I can just plug it in there kind of wherever I want. You can also, there's a key command you could do, not that one. Change these key commands around. But yeah, you can just purposely move things off manually. And that's a decent way to do it if you're not doing it a whole lot. However, something like this, I've got a bunch of hi-hats in here. I've got 16 hi-hats in here because these are on 16 notes. I don't want to have to like manually move them off, especially if I move them back, it starts deleting notes and it's kind of a pain. So that is what groove and the groove pool are for. That's what swing is for. So you can do it manually, which I've definitely have done and can be totally worthwhile, or we can let the computer do it for us. And to do that, like I said, we're going to use the groove pool. So to access the groove pool, this is actually where your groove pool lives. You have these two little squiggly lines over on the left side of the screen. And if I want access to my groove pool, they've changed all this stuff around. I guess the easy way to do it is go to your grooves right here. But they changed all the folders. This bothers me actually. These used to all be in folders, and now there's just a big folder over here in your browser. So what I'm gonna do here is there's a bunch of them, all kinds of different interesting grooves here. I'm gonna focus specifically on the swings. So groove is like a big umbrella term that basically just means instead of quantizing to the grid, we're going to quantize to a different pattern. So this can be a lot of different things. This could be like shifting things around in different ways. Swing is a particular type of groove. So a swing basically means that every other note gets delayed. So every other note will be a tiny bit off. So let me actually switch this around. We're going to start with 8 notes. Yep. So here's my drum pattern with the with 8 notes. So we're going to go specifically to the swings, and there's 2 numbers here. We have, this is obviously an 8-note swing, and these are obviously a bunch of 16-note swings. And then we have another number behind it. We got 52, 54, 57, 59, all the way up to 73. These are a percentage. And basically a swing of 50 does nothing. A swing of 75 is very, very obvious. So that's kind of the ranges we're looking at here when we're talking about swings. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start somewhere in the middle, and we'll do like a 64th note swing. If we click on it, it'll preview it for us and we can listen to it. That's the pattern there. So if I want to apply this to a particular groove, I can either click and drag it onto this clip right here. I can click and drag it down here, or I can just double click on it while this clip is selected. I'm just gonna drag it down here. So this does 2 things. Number 1, it adds that swing to our groove pool. You can also drag it down there if you want. We also have access to it down here. So when you add a swing to a clip, you will be able to hear it, but you won't be able to see it. So let's listen to it one more time dry. Here's no groove. Everything's exact on 8 notes. And if I turn this on, you can hear it like totally changes up the rhythm versus this. So, like I said, we can hear this, but we can't see it. So what this is doing is that every other 8th note is going to be a little bit late, which means that this note is on time, this note is late, this one's on time, this one's late, etc. It'll also include this kick here. So this kick will also be late. So if I want to actually see what's going on here, if I want to see how this works, if I hit the commit button, which is this little arrow right here, or in Live 10 if you're using that, it just says commit. If I click on this, we're going to see what's going to happen. So we can see that this note is now a little bit late. This one's a little bit late. This one's a little bit late. This one's late. My kick here is also a little bit late. And we can hear it in there. You'll also notice that once you commit it, it's no longer selected here as being active. So it just writes it into the MIDI. And I'm going to Command Z to undo that. Actually, I'm going to commit it one more time. So you'll notice here that these numbers, when we're talking about swing, is a percentage, right? So it means that if you have a swing of 50, that means that this note is 50% of the way between here and here. If I have a swing of 75, it's going to take this and move it all the way over here, because this is 75% of the way between here and here. Whereas like 65 is going to be like in here. So that's what those percentages mean. So if I want to do like a 75 or 73, and I commit this, you can see it's 73% of the way, each one of these between here and here. So that's if we're talking about swing, particularly as a type of groove. So the groove pool is a great way, and if you don't want to manually move things around, you can just like hit a button, it moves a bunch of stuff around for you, which is pretty handy. And these timings are kind of designed to be ones that sound pretty decent. So let's try the same thing, but let's do 16th notes. Let's do a 66% groove, and if you just add your groove to the groove pool right here, it'll be added to this list, so you can switch back and forth between different grooves. So if I try adding a 16th note groove right now, if we take a listen to it, doesn't do anything. The reason it doesn't do anything is that every other 16th note is being moved. So it's this area right here, this area right here, this area right here, and this one right here. So you cannot apply a 16th note swing to an 8th note pattern. So we're going to go in here, turn this to 16 notes. And now if I listen to it, let's listen to it first with no groove. It's on the grid. If I switch this to a 66% 16th note groove, we get this like really interesting, with, for lack of a better word, groove to it. Like you start moving your head to it in different ways than you were before. And if you want to commit it, we can see that every other 16th note is going to be a little bit late. So something like that. We can actually apply an 8th note groove to a 16th note clip, and that'll sound different too. And again, if we commit this, we'll be able to see the timing change for all of these. So that's kind of the basic idea. I would definitely recommend starting with swings first, because it's kind of the easiest to wrap your head around. But there's a bunch of like really cool, weird stuff in here that is worth checking out. There's some like different grooves from different drum machines, like the MPC or the SP1200. There's like different percussive grooves, and you can like click on it. You can hear it. These AGR files, Ableton groove files, are just MIDI clips. So if you took this and just put it on a track, you can actually see that this is the timing and velocity that it's quantizing to. So think of it, once again, like instead of quantizing to the grid, you're quantizing to wherever these notes are. So we can like see a bunch of these. So in this case, you'd be quantizing to this instead of quantizing to the grid. It looks like they've added some too. There's some like cool hip hop ones in here. There's some funk ones. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Yeah, it's like different shaker rhythms. And here they are. So this is what you're quantizing to. I've actually been in situations where I took this MIDI information and just used that for like my percussion, just by dragging it in. Yeah, absolutely. So if you have this drum beat here, this still has the swing. If I like move these notes around, it's still going to be there. So it applies to the entire clip, even while you're working on it. Yeah, they also include velocity, although a lot of them, the velocity is pretty subtle. It can be hard to tell. A max sequencer is going to be a little bit different, because usually the max sequencers generate MIDI themselves. You don't need to input MIDI to a max sequencer. You just hit play and it starts playing stuff. So in that case, it won't work unless you bounce it out to either MIDI or to audio. That's the other thing. Grooves work on audio as well as MIDI. So you could have we could actually, let's go ahead and have no groove on here and duplicate this. We'll freeze it and we'll flatten it. So if I have something like this and I add a groove to it, this is audio. But it applies the groove there. And if you hit commit, you can actually see what it does there. It tends to work better with MIDI than it does with audio, because MIDI just moves the notes around. With audio, it has to warp it and do some like weird stretching. So you'll notice that like it can screw up the audio quality a little bit, but you definitely can apply a groove here and apply it to audio if you want to. Does that make sense? Yeah, with like a max 5 sequencer, you'd either have to bounce the MIDI out of the max sequencer or flatten it to audio and then apply the groove to it. But yeah, groove is super fun. It's one of those like secret, it's not even a secret weapon. It's one of those things that like a lot of people don't understand how groove works or what it is or what it does, but it's so important, especially for just like writing interesting kind of like off kilter weird beats. One of the best examples of this is the Burial album Untrue. That whole album he wrote without a grid. He just didn't have a grid. And so all his beats feel really kind of loose, but they all still work. And so I think in many ways, when you're getting started, the grid is great. But the more you start writing music, the more the grid is your enemy. And so I actually spend quite a bit of time, especially as I'm dialing in my tracks and finishing my tracks, is like taking things that are on the grid and just like slightly shifting them off to make them a little bit more imperfect. But yeah, that's a fantastic question. I did a little video kind of talking about a lot of the same stuff that I talk about here. It's on the channel somewhere if you want to review it at some point. Sweet, but that's a fantastic question. You guys are just full of good questions today. So with polyrhythmic stuff, it should still work fine. There might be situations where, like, for example, here, maybe I want to have groove on my hi-hats, but I don't want to have groove on my kick and my snare, because the groove will automatically apply to the entire MIDI clip, all of the MIDI notes. And there's no way to make it only apply to specific notes unless you were to have them on separate tracks or separate clips. So I've definitely had situations like this where I had all my drums in one place, and then I just duplicated the entire drum rack, and then I, deleted the hi-hats out of one of them and deleted everything else about the other. And then now I can apply groove to my hi-hats without it affecting the other parts of my drums. So sometimes it's easier to, like, if you only want groove on certain sounds, to have them on a separate track so they get their own separate clips, and then you can kind of be really systematic about how you apply groove. Applying groove to melodies is also like a really underrated way to get some really cool sounds. Most people, when they think grooves, they think percussion. They think like shakers, hats, that kind of thing, which is definitely a great place to, like, get practice applying grooves. But try putting grooves on your melodies. It can sound really dope. It can like totally change the vibe of a melody without you really doing a whole lot to it. In fact, I'm gonna do that next time I write a song. It's just apply a bunch of groove, and you can apply groove to your bass lines. You can apply groove to whatever you want. Sometimes if you're using like triplets, it might be a little weird just because it's going to try to mostly quantize things not on a triplet grid. So I would watch out for on triplets, but triplets themselves are already kind of a little bit off time. So I don't know if you'd really need to apply groove to those. Yeah, no worries. Sweet. Well, anybody else got any questions? Things they want to talk about? I feel like that was a good stream today. Yeah, get some rest, make some tracks. Next track you send me though, I want to hear some groove in it somewhere. Get off the grid. Sweet. Well, in that case, I think we had a really solid stream today. I appreciate everybody sending in their tracks, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the feedback and you take those ideas and put those on the make good use of those. And I look forward to hearing your tracks again. I should be back next week, both Tuesday for the just hangout and chat office hours kind of stream. If anybody missed it out there, last Tuesday I did a little kind of like just interview talk with a friend of mine who mixes and produces professionally, and just kind of talk to him about kind of his workflow and kind of like what his life is like. So if you're interested in checking that out, that is up on the channel. But yeah, next Tuesday I'll be back for a hangout stream, and then a week from today we'll have another song feedback stream. Also, keep in mind that there is the second sample pack song challenge is now live. It's been live for like a week. So if you want to do that, there's a video on the channel that will have a link to both the samples themselves as well as all of the relevant info. And that is due the last Friday of the month, which I think is something like the 30th. So you got a little bit of time, but that month's going to go by real quick. So if you want to get in on it, go ahead and start those tracks now. I need to start mine as well. But yeah, appreciate all you guys for showing up, showing some love, hanging out, and I will see you guys next week. Have a good weekend.